Our second topic of the night is climate change. And our first question is, how immediate is the problem of climate change, and what steps should the next administration take to balance both the economic risk and the environmental impact of their policy decisions? Greens?
Luckily, this is the platform we're running on, so I think I have some answers to this. First of all, we need to touch on the factor that climate change is not unbiased. We are essentially propagating climate change all over the world, and a prime example of what an industrial nation can do to other poorer nations around the world. It's really the poor nations that suffer by climate change. The U.S., Russia, China, and let's see here, and other European nations are responsible for 90% of carbon emissions, according to Mark Maslin. This is not an issue that we should be playing around with, and we need to boost our economy by looking at solar panels and other economic solutions for global warming.
Would a group like to respond?
Yeah.
Republicans?
So with climate change, there's really three arguments that we have. The first one is most predictions that have been around with climate change have mostly become false. They haven't come up to what is actually the truth. You feel free to cherry pick exactly what data that fits your narrative, but you should really take the time and look at all the data. So that would be the second point, is to really look at everything that's happening. I guess you feel free to think that climate change is happening, but we're not dead yet. We might die in a whole lot longer than what we're going to be around for a long time, guys. And then I think the third argument is the most compelling for the Republicans. It's that any government intervention to try to solve climate change is not going to work. There's nothing that this government can do to force other governments to lower their carbon emissions.
Young Americans for Liberty?
So I'd first of all just like to start off by saying that climate change is absolutely a real threat, probably one of the biggest threats globally. And while some of the other groups here might try and focus on trying to solve that problem by using a lot of spending, big government policies, et cetera, Young Americans for Liberty and the libertarian perspective on it sees that we can solve this problem through a means that is not using a ton of spending on the government side. First of all, what we need to do is end subsidies on dirty energy. First of all, the government and government policy is definitely one of the biggest propagators of pollution and climate change. So things like ending subsidies on dirty energy, ending what's called sovereign immunity for the government is really important for the climate. So basically this means that the government can pollute without having any kind of, any kind of repercussions and things like that. The government really needs to have accountability.
Greens?
I'd like to start off by saying that I really appreciate you guys coming out, but I would love it if you guys just kept it quiet when my panel mates up here are trying to make points. But also the Green Party is, we're running on climate change. That's one of our major issues. And we propose a Green New Deal where the government and the private sector can work together to reduce carbon emissions, and our end goal is to get 100% off of them. We do have plans to do it. We have the infrastructure planned out, and we calculate that it will create close to 20 million jobs. So we also believe that getting off of carbon emissions will be great for the economy as well.
I just want to add in that professor of environmental studies that I quoted earlier, Mark Maslin, has stated that if we don't get this solution for climate change, the economic repercussions would be up to 20% in terms of our GDP by the year 2100. And if we do get the solutions, we can benefit extremely economically.
Democrats?
I mean, I agree with the Green Party in a sense that, yes, climate change is definitely something that, is impacting us. And it's not just the U.S., it's the whole world, really. And if we, like they said, we need to invest in, more jobs into solar panels, more in clean energy. We can't just ignore it like my opponents on the other side. And they would like to say that, oh, it's not that important. Of course it's important. Yes, okay, yes, we have corporate interests probably pushing you to say, oh, it's not that important. It's important, and it's like not our main focus. But the only reason that you would be saying that it's not that important is because of corporate industries of oil and big banks.
Libertarians?
Our colleagues, young Dems over here, mentioned that they need more government health incentives. But something that commonly gets forgotten is incentives gone wrong. And one of these examples is Solyndra, the solar company, heavily subsidized by the government and went completely under complete disaster.
Republicans?
Yeah. So I figured my argument wouldn't be taken too nicely, but I will just like to. I'm glad we have fact checkers out who can prove my point here. About a year ago, NASA came out with the report saying that the Antarctic ice caps are having a net gain. The polar bears are actually there's more than ever now, and the CO2 is increasing, but that doesn't correlate with temperature increases actually. Over the last 20 years, the temperature of the globe hasn't increased. That's from satellite data. And actually, there is a positive effect to more CO2. The yields in agriculture are increasing, but that's just a side effect. That's not something we necessarily want, but hey, we get more agriculture from it.
Libertarians?
Just one small thing I'd like to point out is that not recently, actually, a few years ago, the commonly used term changed from global warming to climate change, and it was pretty much specifically for that purpose. It's not just a general warming, it's actually immense change to the environment. Just throw that out there.
I just want to make a point regarding the climate change. So yeah, climate change is real and exists, and it is a problem that we need to deal with. But every time that we try to get to a solution, we need to consider every side of the problem and the side effects that government regulation might have. The Green Party and the Young Dems mentioned poor people. Do you know what's the biggest problem for poor people in poor countries? It's not the environment. It is lack of energy. So crippling regulation from the government that don't allow these poor countries to develop energy, energy resources. And the same thing, you could say the same thing in the US. If we introduce regulations that like completely destroy the energy industry, that's not an acceptable solution. And it doesn't pass the cost-benefit analysis.
Democrats?
When 90%, over 90% of scientists agree that climate change is real, I don't really know where you got your credentials, but I tend to side with the scientists and think that climate change is real. I'm going to go ahead and cite the fact that our coral reefs are dying because of the acidification of the oceans, as well as having a hurricane, a category, like when it made landfall, it was a Category 3 hurricane. In October, the water has to be 80 degrees Fahrenheit for a hurricane to even form over the ocean. That's insane in my mind. You look at New Orleans, you look at Virginia Beach and Norfolk area. Both are very susceptible to sea level rise, and we need to do something about this, and we need to do something quick. Thank you.
Greens?
I'm just extremely confused at the idea that we can let our market run the way it is and let industry keep on polluting the environment as it has been and somehow assume that climate change is going to even out on its own. I mean, that position to any scientist, I'm sure, would be shocking. So if we really look at instances where government initiatives have been successful, we would look at cases like Germany and Ontario, Canada, where in the instance of Ontario, Silfab is a solar panel company that has created over 31,000 jobs. That statistic is according to Naomi Klein. And we can produce the exact same initiative here. Germany has publicly owned like citizen groups and cooperatives that are fighting against climate change, and that's half the environmental sort of sufficiency that they have, and we should be enacting these over here.
We'll move on to our second question regarding climate change. A 2013 Cook review found that 0.7% of peer-reviewed studies rejected the position that humans are responsible for global warming. What role have humans played in raising global temperature 1.7 degrees Fahrenheit since 1880? Republicans?
I'm just going to address this real quickly. Prager University online has a really good YouTube series involving this, and it's talking about it's impossible for any climate scientist to receive any research funding from the government unless they're researching climate change. So in order to receive funding from the government, they must say that they believe in global climate change or global warming or whatever you want to call it. So because of that, since the study that was cited only lists climate scientists that are being funded by the government, there was an inherent skew, and also that study in which only how many was it?
0.7.
0.7 studies, those are also funded by the government to address the man-made climate change and the causes of it. So there's an inherent bias with the survey.
Democrats?
So are you saying that the government is not qualified to run studies? Is that basically what you're saying?
I'm saying that the government should never run surveys because when the government get involved, they tend to screw things up.
So no one in the government is qualified to
No,
perform a study on climate change.
It's the same reason why they're always doing construction out on 460. Because if they actually work hard every day and they actually get the job done early, then next time they come around and do the same project, they're going to get funding cut. And so in order for the next time around for them to get more money, they need to draw out the process, say, hey, next time we need a lot more time, we need more money. And that's the same reason why all these studies, if the studies actually show that temperatures aren't increasing, then they're not going to get funding for the next project.
Can we rebuttal or can we respond
Yes,
to
you may.
that?
Democrats.
You want me to go?
Go ahead.
All right. We don't trust the government for policies and tests and surveys, and as well as deciding things with their policies. What about the Food and Drug Administration? Because I trust them with my Oreos, my Zyrtec, my Flonase, all the medicine I take. I mean, the government has done lots of studies that are very successful. Otherwise, I would not be on my allergy meds right now.
The government got us to this point. It's 2016. We started a little while ago. I think that they can get us into the future.
So you trust all the processed plastics and preservatives in your Oreos and other processed foods that you pull off the shelves?
But you don't think those are bad for the environment?
No, I do. I'm just saying.
Young Americans for Liberty.
You can't choose one thing that you want to defend and not defend it across a broad spectrum.
Young Americans for Liberty.
Yeah, so to actually answer the question, absolutely, humans have been the major cause of climate change, which is a thing, of course, but to just address how we should address this in the future, brought up by the Greens, the market taking care of this. One of the major things about this is that climate and the energy market is not a free market. Right now it's subsidized heavily by the government, and a lot of government interests are intertwined with this corporate interest. So letting just corporations pollute isn't what's going to happen under a free market. Right now we need to actually get it so that clean energy is a viable solution. You also mentioned Germany, but the problem with Germany is that they heavily subsidize their clean energy. But what happened right now is that basically energy is extremely expensive in Germany, and so people can't afford the energy that they need to do basic things. And so we want to avoid that, but also encourage clean energy.
Greens.
Having lived in Germany for 5 years, there's one thing that you notice right off the bat. It's the outrageous number of windmills and solar panels, and not only are these things provided by corporations and the government, but also they're largely privately owned as well. People use them on their own houses, and it's ridiculously affordable to buy your own solar panels and windmills because those two are subsidized by the government in Germany, and that is a fix for the moment for expensive corporate energy. Thank you.
Democrats.
How did I lead into that? Oh. I don't know what I'm saying.
Okay. Well, honestly, the first thing that needs to happen before anything else is overturning the decision made in Citizens United, allowing big money to be able to lobby politicians in DC and essentially hold up these huge projects that could bring us into the 21st century, make us a leader in clean energy. You're talking about billions and billions of dollars in lost revenue. We're talking right now, Dominion Power won a contract to build wind turbines off the coast of Virginia. What's the holdup? There's no incentive for them to do that because there's far too much money far too much politics tied up in an issue that needs to be dealt with now. Thank you.
Libertarians?
So one thing I mentioned, Citizens United, I think that's something that doesn't really apply to this question. Basically, Citizens United only applies to companies that spend for political speech outside of their treasury, basically. It doesn't actually apply to the regulations of the McCain-Feingold Act that have to do with donating money. Those are exactly the same before and after the Citizens United case. But as far as like actually using that to lobby the government, absolutely, I agree. The corporate lobbying of the government is really a problem, but the solution to that problem is reducing the power that the government has and not reducing the power of the companies. The government is the thing that people are using as the power resource. If we reduce the power of that power resource that people are using to actually implement these bad policies, then we won't have the bad policies.
Republicans?
So green legislation negatively affects the poor more than it does anyone else. It will increase energy costs, and it will be so much harder for us to have a thriving economy. In the future, in order for us to have a start to our economy, we need to have cheap energy in order for our factories and all of the rest of our businesses to produce goods at a cheap cost and grow the economy.
I'd also like to point out that the government has backed a clean energy company before by the name of Solyndra, and that didn't turn out very well. It kind of went bankrupt. And if you really believe that climate change is affecting humanity, there's a reason why a week before the Wright brothers first took flight in Kitty Hawk, flight was declared impossible by the press because the government had put $1 million in it when it took the Wright brothers substantially less. I think the estimate's at $100,000.
Democrats, we'll let you respond, then we'll move on to our next topic.
I want to say for industries to be building with cheap energy, like no industry was built overnight. You can't just have something, it's going to take time for that to happen. So relying on cheap energy is not necessarily the way for industries to be building. If we start investing in renewable and clean energy slowly over time, then we can start building new jobs, switching them over from the from fossil fuel industry slowly to clean renewable energies. Therefore, we will be less dependent onto fossil fuels, and then we will move to a better climate